Reinvent the wheel.
The assisted living?
Of course it would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good for them.
That's a transition.
It is.
There's always more available to do.
Right. There'll be a nurse that will either care.
When do you anticipate the event to occur? So they have a place that's available.
Yes.
That's where the kicker is. It's like, I want to get in, but
Because the one that they looked at was the one
was.
is. Wow. I was like, well, I don't think you can He's just one that accepted it.
Yeah.
In that frame of mind where he accepted it.
Yeah.
Plus there's regularity there. Meals get served.
Yeah.
Medicines don't get missed.
Right.
And that's
That nasty medicine's causing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is there something?
Water. It's like, well, and you have to nip that anxiety, chronic anxiety. Goes right into depression.
At least not at the same point.
Right.
They'll still be there. Right.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
Anytime you're ready live.
Yep.
I'm trying to teach up here. He's doing his own sermon back there. All right. If everyone wants to find their seats. I'm speaking specifically to Brad. All right. Before you jump in Bible study, John, you lead us in open prayer.
Father in heaven, as we come before you this morning, we just really want to thank you for those of us who were able to certainly to make it here, as well as those who will be coming at some point later this morning. We just thank you for providing us with the safety to get here. And we just certainly just again want to pray for those who will be coming in at later points throughout the morning. We want to pray for those who also who are not able to make it today. due to illness and other issues that they may be dealing with. We just pray for them, Father, and we certainly want to pray for all those of us who are here who have family members who are dealing with health issues and various other issues at this particular time. And we just want to pray that you'll give Jace the strength that he needs to get through this today, just to help us to continue to learn more about the topic that we're dealing with. And we thank you so much, Father. We just pray all this in your precious Son's name. Amen.
John, thanks for that prayer. All right, so for people who weren't here Wednesday, we wrapped up chapter 4. To kind of summarize before jumping into chapter 5, jumping back on points 3 and 4, just kind of building the foundation for where we are now. Remember, point 3 basically establishes that we know there's a theistic God. That's provable. And then the next kind of comes from that, and that the theistic, because a theistic God exists, we then know that miracles are possible in this world. So chapter 5 then opens us up with miracles can be used to confirm a message from God. And if you're looking at like the overall points, that's kind of like the summary of the chapter. But the overall points is a little more wordy. Miracles performed in connection with the truth claim confirm the truth of God through a messenger of God. So I know we talked last week and then also Wednesday about kind of what we're stipulating as a miracle and not, etc. But building the kind of the foundation here, it's pointing toward we can make claims through the miracles that God is able to perform. So in the summary section there, one of the big things that it'll touch on here is in order to be claimed to be a miracle, used for that message, it must be truly supernatural, multiple, unique, and connect with the truth claims. We'll walk through those, discuss those, and review thoughts on all of that. So, all right, opening up, I think it does a lot of summarizing. A good summary is actually of the book in total is actually on page 66. The top there it's going to step us through all the next progression of steps to get to the point of saying we can prove that Christianity is true through this sequence of thoughts. All right, second paragraph there on page 66, if you're in the physical book version. The PDF I know jumps around, so I don't even know where that is at this point. So it makes a claim, it opens up and says all three major theistic religions, so it's claiming Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, that they all make the same claim, that miracles performed or in connection with the truth claim are acts of God to confirm the truth of God through a messenger of God. And so it's going to walk through the primary purpose of miracles that it states is, for God to communicate with us, i.e. for us to know it was God that was communicating through the miracle. It says, then it'll walk us through primary purpose of miracles in each of the foundational religions there, and then jump into essentially discussing about how unbelievers admit that miracles could be used for divine confirmation even if they don't agree that miracles are possible or that they occur. So, doing a lot of rambling, trying to kind of build the foundation, set us up here. All right, so what's the foundation? So before we get into like the primary purpose of miracles in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, what is the main idea behind what it's communicating there in that first paragraph on the bottom of 66? Open-ended question there. Why would God communicate with us through miracles?
To show that he's supernatural.
So to show that he's supernatural, and then beyond that, I guess, I want to rephrase this.
Just to show that there's something outside, there's a being, a personal being, that exists outside the system that can affect the system.
And then if he's wanting to communicate with us, what does that say about what he thinks about us? There's a desire to communicate there because
You're made in his image.
let's jump to Genesis 1:27. Somebody want to read 26 through 28 there?
Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.
Very good. I don't know how much more expansion kind of we want to do on that, but I guess the main big picture reason, right, the pointing this out is it's establishing, okay, a theistic God exists, and God doesn't like live in his own bubble, right? He created man in his image, and obviously that's the whole message of, you know, the Old Testament and then moving through the Gospel and New Testament, right? Is that God wants that personal relationship with us, and so the way that he communicates with us in terms of the scriptures is through those miracles, right?
So Jason,
Good.
I was listening to a kind of debate, and one guy, they were talking about miracles, and one guy said, kind of compared it to if you were playing pool and you said, all right, I'm gonna hit this cue ball into this other ball, and it's gonna go into the corner pocket, and you lined it up perfectly, you know it's going, like you calculated everything perfectly, you know when you hit this, it's going to cause this physical effect, and it will happen a certain way. And you can even predict and say, this is what will happen. Like this according to the laws of physics, the laws of nature, this is what's going to happen.
Predictably, right?
Yeah. And so you wind back, and right as you go to hit it, somebody walks by and bumps the table, and it throws your cue off, and what looked like the inalterable laws of nature were altered, right? Now, in that case, you know what the natural cause was because, somebody walked by and you saw them bump the table, or you felt them, right? But that is outside the system of the game of pool, right? And so something that outside the game altered those laws. So kind of like if you think of God being the one that bumps the table, like, okay, I'm watching, and when I want to confirm or want to communicate, in this case, with my creation, he comes by and bumps the table. Only, like, he exists outside time, space, and matter, and he can alter all of that. And you might even end up coming up with a plausible natural explanation, like, well, something bumped this, and that caused this to happen, right? But in the end, whatever did cause it, you can say, well, it was supernatural. It was outside the system of nature. So I don't know if that, I just thought that was kind of an interesting way to, an analogy for us. So.
Yeah, I think we're making an assumption there when we're playing pool.
Right.
That the pool table itself is going to remain static, right? It's not going to be moving, so I can predict the direction of the ball when I hit it, put a certain force on it. And yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good analogy to the way that God's able to work in our reality through miracles, right? Okay, so that kind of establishes kind of, I guess, a reasoning or a foundation for, God obviously, there's being the desire, right, for the communication. In the section around Judaism, I guess, what are if you had to like review, even without the book, right? Just thinking through the Old Testament, what are some of the reasons or some of the claims, I guess we could say, that are established by miracles in the Old Testament? Just some examples, top of your head. Good.
Like when we see him playing with time, or the moon, like the stars, stopping the sun, or speeding up the, the time frame outside of what should be the normal laws. It just shows his sovereignty over the elements.
Okay. And some of those examples would be like in Joshua, right? I think. So establishing his sovereignty over everything, right? Okay. Good.
When you see God putting a plan in place for the people to leave Egypt, and then after they've left Egypt, he still has a plan for them, and he shows them not only through the parting of the Red Sea, but then after that, this pillar of fire and the cloud, and as a guidepost for them. You don't see that in nature as a normal thing, and it was meant there to show them where to go, that he's with them. And it's also a proving point for others around them also see, ooh, this is something special. Right?
So at that point, the claim is God is with his people, God guides his people, right?
Right.
Other examples? I guess since we're in Exodus then, right? So what's when Moses approaches the burning bush, right? And he says, look, how are they going to know that it's not just me that's saying these things? How are they going to know it's you, right? So what's the point of the miracles established there with Moses? Why does God give him the power to do what he does? Why does he perform the miracles specifically associated with Moses?
To confirm that God is the one who sent him.
Yeah.
And so he tells him to take his staff and throw it on the ground. And the funny part about that is when it turns to a snake, Moses freaks out and runs away from it.
It's almost like that's not a natural thing for it to
Right.
occur, right? So the way I kind of like just wrote a header here. So to establish Moses' authority, right, as a messenger of God. And then I think it even gives the example of Elijah, right? So like later on, in 1 Kings, number one, it establishes that Elijah is a prophet of God, right? For just right off the bat. But then what's the other, for the 1 Kings example, I thought was a good one to touch on, because not only is it, hey, I'm a prophet of God and my message is true, it's also kind of redirecting, right? So when I say redirecting, what is the message there? Go ahead.
Well, saying that God is who he is, and Baal is not who they say he is, right?
Yeah, so it's almost like refocusing, right? Trying to refocus the attention of the Israelites on God. I really love that quote from 1 Kings 18:21. I'm on just page 68. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. And then basically it continues on there. And after the igniting the fire with the water and all the good stuff and consuming everything, then at the bottom of the paragraph, 1 Kings 18:38-39, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. So again, just showing another one of those. So establishing the prophets as the true deliverers of the word, if you want to say that, right? And then also they have the example of kind of trying to draw his people back to the Lord. What else? He just kind of has those two, I think, as like high level. What else does he do in the Old Testament? Is there anything else? I'm not looking for anything specific. Are there any other verses that come to mind, or any other reasons, Old Testament-wise, that any other claims that we think are being made with miracles in the Old Testament? I guess outside of, I'm a prophet, this is true, and if you want to say like redirecting their direction toward God, attention to God. And then Alan, you brought up obviously God is with his people, the idea of the cloud or the pillar of fire, right, leading them along. Any other thoughts on Old Testament examples? Go ahead.
I think too, like, this is maybe a minor distinction, but when there are terrible things that are going to happen, God prophesies that those things are going to happen to show that he intends them to happen and that he's still in control. Like, probably the most recognizable one is Daniel. He tells Daniel there's going to be an abomination. He shows him what's going to happen, and it's horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Daniel cannot believe that. And anybody that would be observing the stuff that happened during the Maccabean Revolution and all of that preceding that, if you were just observing that, you would say, God, it doesn't exist. Like, if God existed, he would not let this happen. Like, there's some bad things that happen, but this, like, God is clearly just not coming to the aid of his people. But to say that, for God to say that was going to happen beforehand, and that he's still in control, also it's just kind of a comforting element that miracles and prophecy provide. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the chapter touches on that too later on. But yeah, obviously, the prophetic nature of miracles gives more validity to them, right? Yeah, obviously, like the negative quote unquote miracles, if you want to call it like that, or the reproof or the correction. Obviously, you have Korah's rebellion as another one. I think that kind of falls under the Moses being established as a prophet, right? But at the same time, it's again, I think maybe is correction the right word? I don't know. Other examples in the Old Testament. Dawson, were you going to say something?
My mind's not working right. There's a king who's supposed to go to war, and he said, I can't do it. We don't have enough men. The Lord said, go. It's
So-
all about, yes, having faith in God. It's all about the man being, yes, from God and God with him. But more importantly, it is God's power in all control.
And that's what I was going to summarize there. I think that's where you were getting at was, yep. Yeah, there's an element of reliance there, right? Like, you need to rely on God, but like the other message is, just like in Judges, right, with Gideon, where where it's like, you've got too many people. You could take this to be a natural cause if you win this battle with like the 10,000 men or whatever it was. You need to whittle it down, and you need to whittle it down. Nope, that's too many. Whittle it down. All right, now it's unbelievable for you to be able to do this on your own. I'm going to show my power to deliver you through this.
And that makes me think of Abraham and the sermon that we had last Sunday, and just how God expected him to trust him without, like, we have the Bible, and so we're like, yeah, we know we can trust God because we've got this, but Abraham didn't have that, so he was learning to trust as he went. And when he did trust, things went well for him. And so, miracle.
And that trust is also, right, it's in incredulous situations, right? Like the famine was the one example that it always slipped my mind. I never thought about it really. But okay, there was a great famine in the land, and Abraham then fled to Egypt. And just like in those scenarios where it's like, all right, God, I trust you, but like this is kind of bad. Like people are starving to death. Like all of our livestock, our people, we're all gonna die, right? And it's like, well, again, that's wrapping the whole faith conversation up. It's like, well, yeah, it's the incredulous. Like, you can't do this on your own, where your faith needs to come in stronger, right? Other thoughts on Old Testament examples, or go ahead.
So, yes and no. So, because of chapter 4 and how we kind of were talking about what exactly defines a miracle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the older two and I were talking as we were traveling, and I was just trying to get what are some examples that you might give that might be the case? And so some of those were, well, what about Samson? He loses his strength, but then he gains it back after the hair being cut, right? What about Jonah being swallowed by a great fish? You know, it's not something you normally ever hear of. Is that a miracle? You know, those were kind of some of the things that we came up with is maybes, you know, probably, but
I think the other part of the Jonah story that people focus on, like, oh, there's a big fish, or there's no way there's that big of a fish that could swallow somebody, or whatever. The other miraculous thing is he survived for 3 days.
yeah, well, that was the conversation we had.
Yeah, you're right. He gets spit out on the beach, and it's like he's still alive. Like, that's the miraculous part there. Anyway.
But both of those examples kind of get back to God is with those people, those individuals, right?
Yep.
Even though they may not be wanting to do what is right in all regards, he's still there with them.
Okay. Anything else from Old Testament? Not that this is a fine line and we're no longer talking Old Testament stuff, but all right. Primary purpose of miracles according to Christianity. So what are the claims made New Testament wise from a miracle standpoint? If you had to with the assumption being that any miracle that occurs has some claim to it, what are some of the examples, some of the claims that are made in the New Testament? Big picture or specific examples?
To confirm that Jesus is the King, and so they've been waiting, like the prophets have been saying, there is a King coming, he's going to save you, and so these are all to confirm that he is the Messiah.
So what type of miracles were involved in those? Right, that's a high level claim. So what types of miracles were involved in making that claim?
Providing food,
Okay. Give examples of that?
healing the lame,
There we go.
like
Everything in the New Testament.
provision,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Were there other specific claims or maybe subset claims of the Jesus's king?
Not that he was king, but I had in Matthew 9 where he's healing the paralytic man. He says in there in verse 6, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He then said to the paralytic, rise and pick up your bed and go home. So to me, part of this was also just to show that he has authority, right?
Yeah, absolutely. An example, Acts 2:22 with Peter. He paraphrases, right? Jesus had been accredited by God. Let's open up to that. Acts 2:22. Right, because I think a lot of times, you think about obviously the Gospels talking about Jesus making claims. And then confirming those claims, the validity of those claims with the miracles he performed, but then obviously it continues in Acts. Acts 2:22. Men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. I think that summarizes what we're looking at, but I'll continue reading. This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. And then he goes into David's words and establishing how that was talking about Jesus. But yeah, emphasizing there, obviously, the mighty works and wonders and signs, and then delivered up according to definite plan. So obviously, right, verse 24 is we're looking at. God raised him up. So So, right, as the Spirit falls on all the apostles in Acts, and they start doing these works and wonders, right? Peter's affirming, like, there was a reason that all this happened, and this was all confirming this message. And then obviously throughout Acts, right, it continues to be proof for others to be saved. Okay. Other thoughts, other verses that stood out to you? I know we kind of touched high level reasons for miracles in Christianity or New Testament. Any other verses that stood out to you guys that you're like, this is a good one to touch on, or a good example, or one that just hits home?
I like when Jesus is walking on water and then calls Peter to walk on water. We get accustomed to the things around us, and then we just think that, it's creation, but it's just here. And then when something shows its ability to go beyond that, it really is eye-opening. So Jesus doing it, and they're like, well, yeah, it's Jesus. Well, if it's really you, command me to. It does, and the supernatural part of that. We walk on water if it's frozen. But
yeah, and there's I have the faith to believe that he can do it, but all right, if God's involved in this, then like it's not limited to what's happening right here, right? And then by extension, right, you see that in Acts with the Spirit, and then okay, now they can heal, etc. I know that happens in the Gospels as well, but all right. Yeah, go ahead.
High-level thought process here of miracles, and even people understanding that miracles could happen today, and all that thought process. It didn't convince everybody, even in Jesus' day. I mean, you go to John 8, chapter 8, and he's going after the Pharisees because they do not believe that he is God in flesh. And if with everything that he had done, they still did not believe it. Why? Why? With all the proof, with all here's the evidence, why did they not believe? They didn't want to. They wanted to believe what they had always believed and thought they knew to be true, but they were not accepting of actual truth. I think that's a huge, important part. Those who are seeking, you can point out this stuff to them, and it's going to make sense to them, and they're going, yes, I get it. That was the tipping, that tipped me over. There's others, it won't affect at all because they don't want to believe.
Yeah, that reminds me, I don't know if it's Isaiah, and then it's referenced again in the New Testament, right? Like, it speaks about those who have ears to hear, and then there's, again, I need to look the verse up. They just popped up, otherwise I'd have it ready. But, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me, right? And then just the idea of like a hardened heart, etc. I'm trying to put thoughts together here in sentences. It's not working out. But that also reminds me like that, like whatever like foundation you have will determine how you receive things, right? That's kind of like what we were talking about last week on, the naturalism view, right? And the fact that, if you're set on this is the way, if your foundation is miracles aren't possible, and there's not really any rationale to it, it's just, I just believe this, so I'm going to put this on the world, and this is like, anytime something kind of weird or odd happens, it might be miraculous, it's like, well, no, I already know my foundation says that can't happen, right? So like if you're already set in a particular way of thinking, if you already know what the truth is, right, or your perception of the truth doesn't align with what you see, then obviously you'll reject that right off the bat, right?
His comment also makes me think of Matthew chapter 12 that he brings up in the book, where the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, can you show us a sign to prove that you're the Messiah? And he says, I'm not going to show you a sign other than the sign of Jonah, which for us who have the full revelation is hilarious, because what bigger sign could you have than someone who has spent 3 days at the grave.
Yep.
And even that will not convince some. And Jesus tells a parable and says exactly that. It's the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man dressed fine, eats all kinds of, like, just everything's going well for him. And then Lazarus is the poor guy. In the afterlife, the rich man begs God to let Lazarus just dip his finger in water and come quench his tongue. And he then says, I beg you, send Lazarus to my family. Let him warn them that they will not also come to this place of torment. And Abraham replies, they have Moses and the prophets. And then he says, no, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And he says, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.
And it can sound like kind of coarse, right, the first time you hear that, but then you think, that's like, if you don't believe the entirety of Scripture, right, it's like Moses and all the prophets, like you have all of this, right, to look at. So yeah,
and the other passage that I thought of is John 20, verse 30, right? Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, the anointed King, right? And that by believing you may have life in his name. So, just kind of like that. That's just a great passage to point out that God intended for miracles to confirm the truth about his Son.
Absolutely. Anything else with New Testament? Austin, you look like you're just kind of chewing on something.
It's really off topic. I'm having this thought about seeking the lost and how just where the conversation was. Seeking those that aren't seeking something seems wasteful.
Seeking those that aren't seeking something, it seems wasteful.
Yeah. But seeking those who are looking for God is where that success is really truly going to be.
So when you say seeking, I'm picturing from a big picture standpoint, or how do you view that, I guess, or what?
Yeah, overall, right? We're going and spreading the gospel. Well, we go knock on doors, and somebody opens the door and just completely shuts it down. You know, that's that repetitive. They're not looking for anything. But somebody that opens up the conversation, maybe they are looking for something, right? And that's where you're going to have that more success. And, you know, it ties all of this together a little bit more to just spreading the gospel. Off topic.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, and that ties back to what we talked about at the beginning of chapter 4, right? It's like 1 Corinthians 15 talking about the foundation of our faith is a miracle, right? Like, there is a miraculous side of that, and belief in that is what, right, your faith is contingent on. Oh, good point. All right.
Hey, Chase, let me follow on that.
Yeah.
Since we're already off topic, but I'll see if I can tie it back into our topic, right?
Yeah.
So I still think, and the more that I think about it and live life, I think the best way to evangelize is by living a quiet, compelling life of faith, right? And people will notice that, and they will inquire, right? They'll see that, and you don't necessarily have to. In fact, it's probably not a great idea to shove it down people's throats, right? But rather, just again, living a quiet, compelling life, which, by the way, in its own right, is a sort of miracle. Because Ephesians 2 says, we were dead in our transgressions and sins, but God made us alive. So think about that. If we're adorning the doctrine of Christ, we're living a life of faith. We were dead and God raised us, right? God created a miracle in us if indeed we embrace Him, and it will show in our life, right? So I do think in that sense, so if I'm going to tie it back to our miracle, that's a miracle. The way Ephesians puts it, we were dead and God raised us. And so when we're walking, walk in a manner worthy of that calling, right?
Mhm.
Of that resurrection.
Not living according to the world, right?
So it's not just Jesus' resurrection, it's our resurrection too, from death and sin and transgression.
No, good points.
To that point, made me think of Joe Washington Jordan 7 times. Miracle, but if he didn't follow through, there was no miracle. If he wasn't obedient, there was no miracle to be had. So obedience comes into play here as well, when you look at it from that perspective.
Other thoughts on either this road we jumped onto,
Now,
or
if you can transition from this back to where you wanted to go, it'll be a miracle.
speaking of the theistic God. All right, so Islam. I don't know that anybody is an expert in Islam. So he has literally one paragraph to talk about it. Did anything stand out, or anybody have a summary of kind of the claim there? I think it's a similar claim, right? He uses obviously different texts, different verses there. The things I have underlined. So as eye-opening evidence is part of one of the surah references there, right? So again, it's supposed to be, these miracles are to open your eyes to the truth, to make you understand that this isn't just some random claim that is associated with a claim from God. That's the only thing that I really have a note on there in that paragraph. Any thoughts on not to undermine thoughts on that, but I don't think there's anything different in terms of the claims made in Islam from a miracle standpoint.
Yeah, it's just interesting that all of them really, you need a supernatural something. You need someone to exert authority over the natural form of things in order to prove they are who they are.
And I think that's the point of him, like even including Islam in this, right? Is that theistic God who can act on the world, right? As opposed to deism or some other example where, okay, maybe there's a God, but maybe the God's not personal, maybe the God doesn't act, right? So that's the point of including, I think, Islam in this, is that there's a claim that there's a God that acts, and this is the purpose for him acting or for there being miracles, right? Any other thoughts on Islam? If not, we'll just jump on. Go ahead, Brad.
He didn't really take it this far, but I tend to think, I'm trying to like go through this and think, okay, if I'm having a conversation with someone who denies any part or who is skeptical about any part of this, what would I say, So for me, what I took from this is, if I ever am in a conversation with someone who is a Muslim, right? So I'm gonna go, okay, what point of agreement can we start with? And it's interesting that we could start with miracles. So the Quran talks about miracles and signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they support a claim. And then, here's a couple passages from the Quran where we can go, okay, we have this agreement. What about the miracles in the New Testament, which the Quran kind of hints at?
Mm-hmm.
What if those were true? Then isn't Jesus the Son of God and who he claimed to be?
What if those are true in the way that the New Testament authors state it, right? I found it interesting, not to get on an aside on Islam, but hearing some examples of, obviously, Saint Abraham and Moses, examples of similar stories, which are then, some of the details are jumbled up a bit, and you go, well, that's the right character. These events happen with another character, though. So that's just something that's interesting, right? It's like, okay, let's look at the claims of each one, and then, okay, let's look at the miracles and what the evidences for those are in each instance. Yeah.
Just that also the fact that they recognized Jesus and the power that he had, right? That's significant
Mhm.
because that ties back to the ability to perform miracles. And that's a tie that we both have then easily that we can talk about. Building off of that, well, why is that? Why is it that you feel that way? Why is it that it says that it's that way? But why is it that you don't believe more than just that? What holds you back, right? That would be like the things that I would want to get at.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think this isn't kind of the scope of this apologetics. It is in the realm of apologetics, though. Speaking with Islamists in particular, right? Those that like believe Jesus lived, Jesus was a prophet, but that he was just prophet. He was a good person, quote unquote. I think convincing them, right? Like the chapter 7 talking about Jesus' claim about himself. It's like, okay, if you can agree on that, okay, you think that Jesus existed, etc., but he claimed this, and you think he was just a prophet, like there are issues there, right? And so I think that can kind of chip away at the foundation of Islam as well. Again, not the kind of scope of what we're talking about, but just because we were like, okay, there's a belief in Jesus there. What did Jesus claim according to your text and according to our text? Claimed that he said that there was divinity there, right? And if he claimed that, and he was just a prophet, like if Moses claimed that or Elijah claimed that, like that's a big deal, right? So, any other thoughts on the Islam side of things? All right, we'll probably wrap up there. We'll jump through just some examples. I don't think there's too much time to be spent on the unbeliever side of things, but there are some quotes and some examples I think are interesting. And then logical connection between miracles and divine confirmation, and then it gets again into another list of kind of criteria for miracles being confirmation of claims, like of messages there. So we'll run through those. We kind of touched on some examples of miracles, I think. Walk through Old Testament and New Testament examples. To Dawson's point, right, do miracles happen today? Obviously, ask that and what are the differences in Old Testament, New Testament? Come up with those examples for Wednesday just to continue discussion. We'll try to wrap up with this last little bit pretty quickly and then just have an open discussion around miracles in general and then other questions that we just want to chat through as a group. So.